It's not me, it's you. Can you hear me now? As much as I hate that saying. Can you hear me now? Can I hear me now? Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the last session of today. After this, you're free. You're able to roam the streets of Thunder Bay and have a great time, or stick around and mingle amongst yourselves, collaborate, share ideas. Kind of what we're hoping you're here for. My name is Chris Price. I'm with Bimose Tribal Council. I've been with the Tribal Council for, it'll be 6 years in December, so just over 5 years now. I advise, well, what started out as 11 First Nations when I first started on housing and infrastructure. 2010 went down to 9 First Nations, and now I just got Wabsumum back as a part of the Tribal Council, so we're back up to 10, which is quite an undertaking. There's a lot of homes that I help renovate, advise on construction techniques, training opportunities, as well as community buildings, and a little bit having to do with schools, teacherages, etc. But mainly housing, renovations, and new construction. I provide an advisory service. I'm not there to enforce. I provide advice, saying on health and safety issues, fire safety related issues, on what I was taught. And as someone in technical field who went to college, I was brought up with a set of rules through the Ontario Building Code. And I say Ontario Building Code, but when I refer to it in my letters, I basically refer to it as the Ontario Building Guide. There's quite an amount of interpretation that people don't see. They see it as a set of rules and regulations, whereas it can be very open-ended. If you're willing to have an honest discussion about what the issue is at heart, you can come to an acceptable solution that is beneficial to both parties. You'll be able to meet budgets easier. You'll be able to come to more acceptable solutions that, again, homeowners, band office people, band managers, housing professionals are all willing to agree upon. What we wanted to accomplish with this session, I collaborated with Jan Eeks on this just a tiny, tiny little bit. The title is Entrance and Decks, and it's kind of an open-ended, it can cover a huge amount of information, and considering I only have a little over an hour with a little bit of input, hopefully from everyone here, that this is just going to be an introduction to what we're planning on doing tomorrow. So again, basically providing information, again, using the Ontario Building Guide as a set of guide rules or that we're planning to implement and show you tomorrow for health and safety issues. So, being a member of a technical services provider, I'm there for an advisory role only. And I do it under the Ontario Building Code under Part 9, houses and small buildings. A lot of the buildings that are over 6,000 square feet don't fall into this. Schools, large facilities. I don't touch water treatment plants. They're under industrial facilities. So again, things like teacherages, all the housing units, all types of housing units, single dwelling, apartment style, row housing. As I mentioned before, I use it as a guide. There's, again, a lot of interpretation, and again, there's acceptable rules and means for allowing a discussion to come to an acceptable means of solving a problem or an issue. Again, try and think of it as the rules are gray. It's not black and white some of the time. Some of the time it is very, like, certain heights are maximum and minimum. That's kind of black and white. Some of the rules are open to gray. They can fall in between. One of the things that I always try and promote is that no matter what, I'm always available to my communities, phone, email, whatever, for advice, right? If you're unsure at any point about any technical issue, I love solving problems. That's what makes my day, to be honest with everybody here. The harder the problem, the bigger the issue, the more fun, the more challenging I find it. And I'm finding that more with the working group as well, as they enjoy the challenge. So if you're having something come to light for the first time, you're not sure, they're always an amazing resource. And even amongst the working group, we worked collaboratively. I've come up with issues when I first started, and First Nations, housing issues dealing with, again, building code, health-related, health and safety, that I've gone to people that I work with at other tribal councils for suggestions, recommendations, using their expertise. So when you think of it as you're going to your tribal council, you may, depending on who you're asking, be actually asking the working group in total for help. It's a great resource, and again, I wholeheartedly hope that you use it to your full extent. For those of you that have great internet, I've been made aware that a lot of the fly-in communities have really, really poor internet. This is where you can find the Ontario Building Code online. This will be available, again, online as for you to peruse, but it's available through e-laws. It's a massive, massive document, so it takes a really, really long time to load, even for me in Kenora. So I can imagine the nightmare it's going to be for some of the remotes. You're going to be there for a very, very, very long time waiting for this thing to load. Even to get down to part 9, because you have to go through the first 8 sections of it till you get to part 9. So, I'd like to get started on the type of entrances. One of the major factors is dependent on the style or the type of home. Do you have a crawl space? Do you have a full-height basement? Is it a bungalow? Is it a slab on grade? A lot of it is dependent on availability of materials as well. This is typically the two types of entrances that we see across the working group. You either have something at grade or something as a series of steps above grade. But again, it's a basement, or again, a lot of my communities, it's either a slab on grade or a crawl space. And even when you're getting to crawl spaces, the basement height is usually around just 1 or 2 more steps. So this is what we're going to try and focus on, the one on the left, because this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow. We're going to be doing it in a series of steps through 4 challenges. One of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning, with this being sort of a broad topic, is that if you have any specific questions at any point in time, please do not hesitate to ask. I'll do my best to answer it, and again, open it up to the group. One of the things that I found, again, working with the working group, is that a lot of the fly-in communities have decks and entrances that are not attached to the house. So that's what we're doing tomorrow. Think of it as a floating structure. It's able to move with frost, and a lot of the ones that I deal with are decks and entrances that are connected to the house, so it moves with the house when it's below frost. So, some of the rules and notes to take consideration when you're dealing with a floating. So again, that's the type of entrance where it's moving seasonally, it's on its own. The house may or may not move. It's not supposed to if it's below frost. Is that the ledger board is not connected to the house. That's one of the things I see a lot of, is that you have a house that has a footing or a foundation below the frost line. So again, it's theoretically not supposed to move with frost. Whereas you have a deck that's attached to it where the footings, or it's supported on just concrete pads on the ground. So what'll happen is you have a house at this, say just 2 levels, and you have an entrance deck that's moving like this. So what do you think is going to happen to just a wood ledger board moving up and down like this seasonally? It's going to split, right? There's a chance of failure. So again, what you want to do is have them exactly the same. So if you have a house below frost, you have a structure that's supporting people and steps below frost as well. One of the major things with a floating deck that I came across actually for the first time this year was when you have a floating entrance, is don't put it on a hill, right? So you have a structure on a bunch of concrete pads that's not attached to anything. It's not affixed to any bedrock or dirt. It's just basically sitting there, right? And eventually what will happen is it'll just slowly fall down the hill, depending on how big this grade is. And you may not think it's much, but over 3 seasons, I had a typical 5x5 entrance deck that moved 16 inches down the hill in over 3 seasons. So the person was initially worried about this deck coming away from the house, and then the next season they got really, really worried because it was at the 12 inches. And then by like the 3rd season, I finally got a phone call saying, "What's going on?" I have a 16-inch gap between my house and my deck at my door. So I was like, "Well, your deck is slowly falling down the hill." So this is kind of the scenario that you're talking about. So you have a large concrete 12 by 12 readily available pad, whether it's a concrete block, a post, up to a series of beams and some floor joists. Again, this is not connected to the house at all. It's able to move up and down with frost. One of the scenarios that you should not do this in is if you're getting into accessibility issues. There's code requirements for steps for wheelchairs. So the maximum permissible height is usually around an inch. Like, you're not supposed to have an inch bump so that they can wheel in and out really easily. So if you have this type of scenario, it's going to move seasonally, right? So I wouldn't recommend that you have something that can go up an inch above where it's supposed to be, or like down an inch where you're getting into 2-inch gaps, right? And at the same token, you don't want to have it from, say, the bottom of the door sill to the top of the deck more than the maximum permissible rise in a step, which we'll get into, right? You want to have it in that nice comfort zone so when they're walking into the door, it's not too big of a step and it's not a tripping hazard at the same time. So, as I mentioned previously, when you're connecting an entrance deck or concrete slab, connecting it to the house, for a house that has something that's below frost, the footings or the support for it must be below frost as well. And we'll get into those different types. And then the ledger board connection is based on the location, foundation, and siding material. So there are, depending on how the exterior of the house is built, is dependent on the ledger board connection. Are you using brick with hollow 1-inch airspace? Are you just doing vertical horizontal siding with no exterior insulation? Do you have massive amounts of exterior insulation and then your structure? One of the other things is when you have foundation walls and you have your floor joists cantilevering out. I've seen these a lot in the past, where the floor joists cantilever out, say 2 to 3, usually around 2 feet. Well, you can't connect a ledger board to the end of that rim joist because it's not intended to support that load, right? It's an exterior wall supporting a roof. So again, there's tons and tons of scenarios that you can get into. Again, work with your tribal council if you're not sure. So one of the things that I typically don't see a lot is concrete or cast in place or precast concrete entrances. Even for my communities in the Kenora area, in Dryden, concrete is still readily available, but again, people prefer to provide some concrete structure to the entrances on the posts, and then from there they build it out of wood, being pressure treated. And again, I can imagine it even being more of a nightmare for the remotes. Like, I know typically concrete is avoided at most costs. So again, something to keep in mind, but some of the, yes?
Looking at the example of that concrete, we've got homes like that, and now there's an area you gotta put applicated. And now, you guys have access to a home, and that's how that entrance looks like. Now, in the first, we have to remove the concrete to build it for accessible to go in. See that structure there?
Yeah, so the one on the right with like the railing?
Concrete entrance.
Okay, so the question was, is he has an existing concrete step like on the right, and they're looking to retrofit it into an accessibility ramp. You can, whether or not you're using the concrete as structure. Again,
It was built, it seemed like it was built like that.
yeah, so was it built in place or just precast?
Just in 1989.
Okay,
But now, sort of put that off in. Now she's at home right now. I had a phone call. Now we have to accommodate that accessibility for the.
yep. So what he's saying is that, again, he's retrofitting the stairs for a ramp. And what I would recommend, because there are a lot of site conditions and how the siding's finished, and again, whether there's windows in the way, where this ramp can go, it can be done. It can be done. But again, there's a lot of details that have to be answered. For me, okay, simple thing that I would need from you, if you gave me a picture of the front of the house that showed me grade, windows, where it is, and the height of these steps, I'd be able to give you a 90% answer of what to do. So that's what I would recommend you do with your tribal council.
The height, well, I would take the base of the concrete that's where it gets door, right?
Yeah, you'd need to know this height. You need to know where this is. And then a picture of the house and the site. And then you'd be able to design something. Yeah, yeah. Again, so the thing that gentleman here, Frank, was mentioning was that, again, there's rules for accessibility ramps. There's a maximum rise and a minimum rise. The slope has to fall within this range in order for it to be someone to actually be able to move up and down it. So again, there's something you'd want to consult with or ask your tribal council representative. I'm not going to go into detail on ramps. I could spend an entire session on it, but again, so one of the things I haven't done, but I've seen it in the city of Kenora, is new building material for structure for decks, entrances, is steel. Kenora is pretty lucky being only 2 hours from the city of Winnipeg, where we can get such materials. One of the great advantages of this is that with it being galvanized and if installed properly, can last up to 60 years. So they say. I don't know whether they've actually tested it for 60 years, but it's one of those things that, again, someone will sell you on it, right? This is a lot more expensive, and it's kind of a little bit of a specialized trade. It's not quite like working with wood, specialized tools. Or again, I know most of the guys that I work with have tools, materials, expertise to work with wood day in, day out, night or day, right? I just wanted to bring this to your attention just as an option. And again, this is what I see a lot of. I see a lot of Christmas decorations left out during no, I'm just kidding. I see a lot of steps and entrances like they're on the left. Pressure treated throughout. This one, they actually went a little step further and put up some privacy to keep dogs, animals out from underneath the steps. The one on the right, they actually went full bore with the landscaping and started out with patio stones, which look absolutely great. And if you notice the one on the right, where the deck is in relation to the bottom of the door sill, there's very little step there, right? So it's very accessible. You're not moving up and down with the seasons. So this is what we're going to try and go over piece by piece. We're going to start out at the bottom and work our way up to the top. Sorry, I just have to pull out my timer here because I only have so much time.
What's happening when I see new houses? There's going to be a slide with an entrance like this, and the meter, the unit gas meter, are right there. There's going to be a room, right? differential where it should be located. So I was talking to you in gas, and said, that's cool. I said, no, it's impacting, when the members move, move their furniture, is that a problem?
So,
Is there, the gas meter?
so the question was, or the comment from the gentleman here was,
I'm from Charlie.
Charlie? Okay, so Charlie mentioned that in one of his communities, there's gas meters right next to the stairs or like in the path of. So you're thinking basically there's like a gas meter, where are we? So like somewhere over here, right? So the gas meter impedes on the path of the stairs, right? Like at the base of it, something like that. So we'll get into, again, sort of the rules. There's a minimum width for stairs. So if that rule is met, that's okay. And does anybody know what happens at gas meters? Well, there's a purge valve on the side of a gas meter about yay big and it's round. And then off of that, off the top, there's usually a little spigot. And that has to be with 4 feet away from all openings. So it can't, and basically what that is just a purge valve. So that would be the issue. But we'll get into whether or not the width, whether that would impede the width of a stair. That would be my first thought. But great question, yeah. Personally, again, yeah, if you're to lay out a set of stairs and there's a gas meter there, I wouldn't put a set of stairs next to a gas meter. Like, I wouldn't recommend it. So one of the things that's the difference between building and designing is that designing a deck or an entrance starts from the top down. And what I mean by that is you start out with how big it is. Like, you're starting with like a 12 by 12 entrance, 5 by 5, 4 by 4. When you're building it, you go the opposite way. You start at the ground and work your way up. So there's, again, kind of that mentality where I'm trying to get some of my housing professionals and really good contractors into designing. And it's one of the things they have trouble wrapping their head around. It's the opposite process. Okay? So one of the great references that I'm going to use throughout this, and many municipalities have this. I think the City of London also has one. This one's really good. The link to this is for the City of Oshawa, and if you just simply Google or search Oshawa Deck Guide, it's a 4-page document that individuals provide to the City of Oshawa, their building department, which will give you the joist span, the size of the concrete piers, ledger connections, baluster spacing, stringer requirements, all of that. We haven't started using something like that, but I'd be willing to know if anybody has something similar, is willing to try something like that. Again, I'm kind of leery of going out to my communities and then seeing people doing their own. I mean, I love the initiative and that, but at the same token, I look at it and it's not right whatsoever. So something like this would be good. And again, I wanted you to be available, make you available to everybody. So, moving on from the bottom up, we'll start at the foundations. So this type of foundation is for a floating deck, right? In this case, the person didn't even go to the extent of removing the dirt, putting down a pad, they just threw it on the grass, right? This is going to move a lot with the season. You have a hunk of concrete supporting something, and it's going to move with frost. The layer of grass has what's called the organic layer, and that's really susceptible to frost. It has the most water content in it, and it'll freeze and thaw and move the most. So the next step up from this is to actually remove the sod and get down past the organic dark layer down to whatever's below. Silt, clay, sand, gravel, whatever it may be, depending on your location. So in my area in Kenora, and I know for a lot of northwestern Ontario communities, there's bedrock, whether that's right at the surface or 30 feet down. You're going to hit it eventually. We're in the Canadian Shield. For some of my communities, they take advantage of it. For a lot of them, it's kind kind of a hindrance. This type of detail kind of works for really soft rock. Could you imagine actually taking like a jackhammer and trying to flatten out a hunk of the Canadian Shield to support a pad? Like, that's going to take a long, long time. In all the cases that I've seen, I've tried it myself, and it's going to take a while. So what I recommend is what they do is a cast-in-place form. So what they'll do is they'll actually scribe it to the rock and then pin it. So rather than breaking out this concrete, they'll scribe the bottom of the form to the rock and then still pin it. They'll still drill long bolts, or in this case, typically 15M bars, because those are usually the largest readily available bars at your home center. In my case, anyways, and epoxy those into the ground. Basically, what you don't want is just a bunch of concrete sitting on a rock that can, in this case, probably fall down the hill, or something that can basically be picked up by the wind, right? If you have an open structure underneath, or again, privacy lattice, like wind could theoretically lift up your entire building, right? So one of the things, if I ever go out to a site and they've scribed it, I make sure that I ask them, like, how many bars did you put in if I didn't provide them a set of drawings? Because it's key. Like, you want to pin it to something. The self-weight of it alone isn't going to do. One of the things where, again, for those of you like me who are home renovation junkie, TV show junkies, you're seeing this on TV a bit. This got brought up at my first housing managers meeting this year. Company started up in Winnipeg and they wanted to try this. So these are what are called helical piles, and it requires a drilling rig. So a contractor, as far as I know, I don't think there's one in Thunder Bay yet, but I could be wrong. That could have changed. I haven't looked in months. But what they do is they bring out a small drilling rig, like on the front of a Bobcat, and they drive these into a certain tension. So there'll be a little dial on it, and once they reach a certain capacity, they know that this pile, this helical steel pile, will hold so many pounds, right? So again, that goes back to the design. So how many piles do I need? And then et cetera, et cetera. Again, this could work for remotes on ice roads. It'd be pretty expensive if you're doing like a one-off. But again, if you're doing a large number of these, it could be economically viable. Again, the cost of travel and fuel and everything is not cheap these days, even though it did go down a bit, but still. Again, I wanted to bring this to your attention because it was brought up across my desk. As well as you're seeing it on TV if you're anything like me. So, when you're dealing with foundations for permanent structures below frost, these are the two most common types I see. So the one on the left has two examples. So you have your typical cardboard sonotube, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 24-inch diameter, whatever the load requires. The one on the right there is kind of what I see for hand dug, or what I would recommend for dug holes, where there's no cardboard tube or cardboard form. And the reason I recommend this, can anybody sort of want to throw a hand up and guess why it's tapered? I know somebody knows, but what's that? It not necessarily has to do with sand. Yeah. So it has two purposes. It's kind of a trick question. When you taper the bottom of the pad, or the bottom of the pier, it holds more load, right? So the one I'm sort of talking about is this one here, right? We'll get to this one in a second. But yeah, so when you flare at the bottom of it, you go from, say, like an 8-inch at the top down to 10 to 12 inches at the bottom. That 12 inches is what is bearing. It's holding more load, right? Whereas if you had a straight 8-inch hunk of concrete, that'll hold a certain amount based on the square footage, right? The other second thing is that with these being below frost, the first half of it, or first 3/4 of it, will freeze. That ground will freeze in the winter, right? So what theoretically should happen is that you shouldn't have that pile move, or that hunk of concrete move. There's no way for it to actually physically lift up past the freezing solid ground. So one of the other products that is readily available in Kenora, Thunder Bay, is what they call a Bigfoot system. It's on the image there on the right. So what this is a piece of plastic that comes in large diameters. 16, 18, I think even smaller than that, but I could be wrong. They're pretty big. I think I've only spec'd an 18-inch one. And what this is it allows, again, you have an 8-inch diameter concrete at the top to support a post, and at the bottom you have an 18-inch diameter hunk of concrete. So now my loading is based on that 18 inches, not that 8 inches, right? I wanted to take that load from all that surface area from the deck and transfer it down to the ground, down to bedrock, something large and substantial, right? One of the things I kind of like and not like about this is that your excavation is going to get a lot larger though, right? You started out with an 8-inch hole that you start at the top, and then now you're at an 18-inch hole that you got to dig 4 or 5 feet down, right? That's a lot bigger excavation. So we have a footing made of concrete or below frost, and then from there you're going to connect a post to it. One of the things with connectors is that they have to be rated for exterior exposure. It's really hard nowadays to get non-galvanized connectors out there, but I have seen them. I've seen people make their own connectors to tie in concrete or lap splices or et cetera, et cetera. So again, these things need to last a long time, right? Like you don't want them falling apart underneath a post that's supporting a deck. This is the one that I highly recommend. It has an adjustable base on it, and again, they come in for 4x4s, 6x6s, 8x8s, and some other odd sizes. And what it is that it's adjustable. There's a plate that allows you to sort of center it on the concrete as best you can, and you can do that with the bolt in place or without the bolt in place. If you don't have access to a hammer drill and large diameter bolt, you put the bolt in afterwards, right? And if you don't have access to it, you put a J-bolt or something into the concrete and then put your base down on it. And it allows you the flexibility to move it around. I guess I'll throw the brand name out. Everybody uses it, but it's Simpson Strong Tie. It's usually what Home Hardware, Home Depot, what are the other big ones? Basically all your lumber yards will carry something from Simpson Strong Tie. They have many products out there for different applications. There's about 4 or 5 other post connectors, but this is the one I recommend, and I always spec on my drawings. It gives you the most adjustability. So from here, this is what I recommend for the structure of a deck. Again, I'll throw it's under the Ontario Building Guide under section 923. So typically what I see out there in the field is this is all done and pressure treated. Using end treatment, covering all your cuts, and this type, and again, I always draw this type of scenario where you have a post with some sort of built-up beam underneath, and then you have floor joist line over top of that, you have a rim board and a ledger board. That's your basic structure. This allows a lot of flexibility, right? The one thing it doesn't allow for is getting close to grade, right? Because now you have a post, a beam to contend with. So now you're already somewhere between 12 to 14 inches above grade, right? There are scenarios where you can get decks closer to grade. It's a lot more finicky and a lot more exact. You have to be on the money with it, but it can be done. Again, the reason we're doing this tomorrow is because we see a lot of full height basements, crawl spaces, entrances with 4 to 5 steps. As I was mentioning before, one of the things I do not recommend is this type of scenario where you try and incorporate your exterior guards or your railing, whatever you want to call it. I'll call it a guard because that's what the building code calls it. Railing, whatever term you want to use. We're talking about the exact same thing. In this case, the person has incorporated the railing posts into the foundation, right? They basically tied the top of the post from the concrete all the way up to include their, in this case, a residential 36-inch high railing. One of the big issues with this is that you have to be on the money, right? You have to line up all 4 posts, or your 4 corners, or in this case, all 6, right on. I'm not quite sure if everybody can see it, but we'll get into one of the big no-nos that I see here is that if you look down, camera guy's going to hate me here, but yeah, if you look down here, this is a detail that I see a lot that's not allowed, and we'll get into why, okay? I'd like to sort of keep that in mind. In this case, does he have the room for a post and a beam and then his floor joist? Absolutely, right? The only thing that you might have is another, see how he has 3 concrete piers? You might need a 4th so that you don't have like a massive deep beam, right? But it can work the way I recommend. And there's some other things that are wrong with it, which we'll also get into. So one of the things I see a lot with many of the homes that are those standard box 2-bedroom rectangular homes, 24 by whatever, 36, 38, 40. The thing they're missing is like a covered entrance or some sort of protection from the wind from their main entrance, right? And I see a lot of the time people throwing up little shed roofs with posts sitting on dirt. No structure, no support. Again, moving up and down with frost. Meanwhile, the house isn't, right? So one of the rules with this type of scenario is now what are each of those concrete piers and each of those posts supporting? It's now supporting a snow load, right? One of the things that I've started doing last season with the CMHC RAP program, if you're all aware of it, it's pretty residential rehabilitation assistance program. One of the things, if you're doing simple 5x5, because CMHC only allows you to renovate a 5x5 deck, is whether or not down the road you're going to add a roof to it, right? So I asked them, do you want to add a roof? Like, now's the time. If you're going to put in the structure for it, we can accommodate amount of concrete in the budget possibly to say, hey, we may go from like an 8-inch diameter concrete pad or pier below frost up to a 10 or 12-inch that's now capable of supporting a roof down the road, right? And the only thing they've changed from that entire 5x5 deck is the structure, right? And then from there, they can build up this type of configuration, right? They would have to incorporate the 6x6s into the structure, which we'll get into how to do that. It's one of those little tricks that I, again, sort of picked up after 5-6 years. It's not a big change, but again, if something you might consider doing down the road. So from there, we've gone from a pier footing. We're going to start on the posts. Typically, everything off the rack, pressure treated 4x4, which everybody knows is 3.5 by 3.5, 6, 8 by 8, something square, right? There's nothing wrong with using pressure treated dimensional lumber, 2x4s, 2x6s, and laminations that have to match the beam width. So if you have a 3-ply beam, you can have a 3-ply post, right? You can't have a smaller post. You can't have a 3-ply post and a 4-ply beam. That's just not allowed. You have to have each lamination supported. Same thing goes with if I've spec'd a 3-ply beam that's 4.5 inches wide, can I put a 4x4 post under that? Anybody? No, you can't, because it's only 3.5 inches wide. I need to put a 6x6 post under a 3-ply beam. Post has got to be bigger than the width of the beam. And again, one of the things I kind of see out in the field. One of the things that the lumber manufacturers are saying, and you may or may not see it on TV, is that 6x6 posts have more sapwood. It's a larger tree. So what you'll actually see is typically they'll have, if you look at the top of a 6x6, it'll have the center of the tree. Like the rings are right there, right? So it'll have more sapwood on the exterior of the 6x6 compared to a 4x4, right? You might be able to get a 4x4, 2 of them or 4 of them out of a tree, but typically you don't see that. So what happens is the 6x6 will actually warp less than a 4x4, right? Because it's come out of one tree. Whereas a 4x4, it has an irregular ring pattern. One of the things that you may want to start looking at when you're not necessarily speccing lumber, but if you have the accessibility to go down the lumberyard and pick it out, yeah, pick 6x6s that are the center of the tree, have the center ring, and work out. You're starting to see half of the rings, it's going to warp. So from here, we're moving on to post and beam connections. So you have a post moving up to a beam that's going to support your floor joist. And again, sizing of your beam is based on the span of your floor joist, which again is in turn determined by the size of your entrance deck. These are the only two allowed circumstances for connections. The one on the left is what you would do for a 6x6. That can't be a 4x4. You can't notch out a 4x4 and put 2 plies of something into it. When you're doing posts that support roofs, the left side detail is the only one that's allowed according to the building code. There's enough meat there to support it, right? The connection on the right, where you basically have the top of a post and you have a certain number of plies over top of the post, right? You have a post and structure sitting on top of it or let into it. So you have direct bearing, okay? That's the key. So in the building code guide, these are the details that it provides. So if you look on the left there, it provides the minimum distance, the amount of meat that's required for the bolts, right? It's 2.5? Yeah. Kind of blurry, 2.5. So what you have is a permanent resting connection, right? So it provides you the bolts, and then from there on the right, you see the post cap with the deck post with a beam on that. One of the things that kind of don't recommend, but if there's enough fasteners to basically satisfy this type of connection, so if you can prove to me that you're providing enough support and enough connection between the beam and the post without some sort of special fastener that's going to prevent the beam from uplifting off the post, I'm okay with that. You don't necessarily have to go out and get a specialized connector, okay? If there's enough, one of the things that with dimensional lumber is that the issue with this type of connection is if you have a bad piece of lumber, like say in this area, and where you don't have enough room for, say, toenailing a bunch of nails into it, like there's a bad wane on the side of the board. I've seen that like in rare cases. Just one of those one-off scenarios where, again, you didn't have enough meat in the wood to support it, right? The nails are going to pull out no matter what. So this was kind of the vein of my existence for probably about the first 3 years at the Tribal Council. I was seeing a lot of this. So the rule behind this is that you're relying strictly on the fasteners, right? You don't have, in this case, what would be a laminated 2-ply beam there on the left or on the right, supported directly on top of something else, right? There's no you're relying on strictly the fasteners, right? You're not relying on gravity itself of holding itself down, right? Fasteners don't last forever, and these, again, things can split. So if you're not using gravity on its own and you're relying strictly on like a 2/3/8" bolts for shear strength, then in some cases it's not good enough, right? Get back to the details of, again, where you're putting beams over top of posts, just like you do with, everybody does with centerline beams in houses, right? You don't see a bunch of centerline beams with posts like this where you just nail the snot out of it and just laminate the beam to the post, right? You have adjustable steel posts holding up 4-ply, sometimes even 5-ply beams, right? Again, do not rely strictly on the fasteners. So from there, you have posts, you're getting up into built-up wood beams. Now, the sizing, nailing, all of the rules fall under 923.83. I'm going to go over a couple of the most important ones. But again, the sizing of it, how many laminations, 2x10, 2x12, even if you're getting into engineered lumber, is all kind of dependent on the size of the deck and the joist span. And your pier spacing. So, as much as I just sort of hate standing here reading slides, the joint shall occur over support and shall not occur in adjacent members. So what that means is if you have a post, and say you have 3 plies, right? So if you happen to have a splice in the beam, it has to line up over or near, and we'll get into the near portion, of that post. So if you have a 3-ply beam, you can't have a joint, and then a full member. Does everybody kind of see what I mean? You can have a joint, a full member, and then a joint, right? They can't be right next to each other. You have to stagger the joints and the laminations of the built-up beam. That's one of the things I've seen. We'll get in, yeah, there's, depending on the span of the, yep. There's a great picture that I found. So, one of the keys is that it shall be nailed together with a double row of nails, not less than 89 millimeters in length, spaced not more than 450 millimeters apart. The end of the nail is located 100 millimeters, 150 millimeters from the end of each piece. So when I do a set of drawings for a house, I'll provide a beam layout, and it'll tell you basically where to nail it, right? And it varies depending on the plies of the beam, right? A 2-ply beam is pretty easy to nail together. When you're getting into 3 plies, well, now you're over 3 inches of, right? You're getting to 3.5-inch nails. So you have to do it from both sides, right? You're getting into 4 plies. How do you do that? Do you do the 2 plies together and then try and nail them? No, it doesn't work that way. You're getting into 3.5-inch nails again, right? So again, depending on the size of the beam, even 5 plies, right? There's also an allowance for it to be bolted. There's rules on that, like the size, the diameter, the spacing, and then the distance between your support posts, right? Will allow for it. One of the things that's becoming more and more readily available are structural fasteners out in the field. I'm finding them more and more in Kenora. They're one of the ones out of Menards in International Falls is Grex. Great product, exterior, interior product. Pretty cheap for a fastener, but again, you can get like 6-inch lag screws to basically for built-up beams or structural components. I'm trying to think of the other name at Home Hardware. They're pretty expensive if you're getting into structural applications. Or again, if you can spec stuff that's off the shelf. Lag bolts, lag screws are typically really available. And in this case, with it being an exterior, it would have to be galvanized or stainless steel. So, as I was mentioning before, here's some of the minimum nailing. So 2 at the end, 10D threaded nail, wood screws greater than 3-inch long, and typically they're 16 inches on center. But again, that can vary depending on how many plies and the distance between supports. So this is kind of a general guide, but may not work in all cases. So here's the picture that's kind of really complicated. So this is where you're allowed to have joints that don't line up directly over supports. And it has to do with the span. Kind of don't really want to go into full detail with this. I wanted to provide this so that you could read it at a later date, because it can get kind of complicated. And it's actually kind of best to go through it as an example, because it's dependent on the span between these posts. So whether you're doing a full span, and then you're getting into quarters of that span. So if you have an 8-foot span, you're getting into 2 feet, right? Again, wish I kind of had more than an hour. I could do design examples from the building code for all day if we wanted. So here's something that I needed to show you. Once you have a post and a beam, they're not always at 3 feet above grade, right? Sometimes we're talking about entrances that are second stories, right? So this is the requirement to tie in those posts to those beams when you get over 14. So you're getting up into second story decks, right? So here's your diagonal bracing requirements in both directions. One is attached to the house. And again, simple nailing patterns or bolts. So from there, so we have a pier, post, now we have a beam, now we're on to floor joist, right? Typically floor joist, 2x6, 2x8, a 5x5 deck, simple entrance, you're taking 2x6, is 60-inch on center, be perfectly fine. 2x8s, in most cases, as a general rule, it gets iffy around 12-foot spans. 2x10s, you're looking at 13.5-foot spans, it's kind of iffy. 2x12s, 14.5 is getting iffy, as a general rule of thumb. Spruce, pine, fir, all the stuff you find off the shelf, pressure treated, dimensional lumber, those are the rules that you're working for. Two of the big rules is that when you're framing it, as you know, you can either have it floor joist sitting on top of a beam, or it can be framed into the side of a beam. In this case, we're talking possibly not necessarily a beam, but a ledger board that's tied into or next to the house, right? So again, part 9 falls under the span of it, how long, and again, that's all dependent on the size of the deck and your entrance. So this is what we're talking about, the joist to beam details. So on the far left, option 1, you basically have 3 8D nails going into your floor joist, tying into the beam. That's enough to prevent uplift, right? 3 nails. Option 2, you go out to your hardware store, you get a specialized fastener. I know these ones aren't readily available at Home Hardware in Kenora or McMahon and Yates, so I don't recommend it. And again, most people have framing nailers readily available on site as it is, right? Many of these, option 2 is sometimes referred to as a hurricane tie. You may also see those with respect to truss and top plate connectors. They're also kind of in that realm of same thing. Basically prevent uplift. You don't want the floor joist coming off of the beam. And then option 3 is your joist hanger option for, again, ledger boards, or if you're tying into the face of the beam. Your deck's getting lower to grade, this is an option. And this option 3 is for an interior floor joist. We'll get it into specialized hangers for the last 2, the outside face of the deck. So these are the images taken right off the Simpson Strong Tie. Joist hangers fall under 923.83, and you have to spec the hanger depending on the use. I think there's about 2-3 pages of joist hanger sizes alone for Simpson Strong Tie. And one of the only general rules is that you have to use the fastener that they recommend in the tables. So you're stuck with an 8D galvanized nail or a 16D galvanized nail. And so what you have there, and the different lengths, right? So that would be the middle image there. So what you want is a nail long enough to go through your floor joist and then basically in this case a rim joist or your ledger board. One of the things I see a lot is joist hangers with screws. People ask me, I don't recommend it. People ask me why, and I tell you that Simpson, the hangers are rated for galvanized nails, right? They've come out with a specialized fastener, I believe in the last 2 years. It's like a bolt, but again, it's galvanized. And the key there is that you have a galvanized hanger with a galvanized fastener. As soon as you start mixing metals, you start using brass screws with galvanized hangers, what happens is it rusts. As soon as you have presence of oxygen and water, natural moisture in the air, it's going to rust. Even with coated screws eventually over time, because basically what you've done is you put the screw in, you've worn off the coating on the hanger as you've driven the screw. So typically it'll rust no matter what. Yeah, yeah. So one of the other things that, sorry, Frank? Yeah, Frank mentioned that each hanger has a certain number of holes, and each one of those holes is supposed to have a fastener. So it's easy for the housing managers, building inspectors to look up and see a hanger missing 3 or 4 nails, right? The image on the far right is what they call a concealed joist hanger, okay? So this is what I always spec on a set of drawings for the outside joist, right? So you have a beam tying into a joist at the very end, because what I don't like to see is them using this and then bending over the flange, right, on the outside of the rim, right? Because basically what you've done is you've voided all the strength out of the holding capability of it, right? Now you're just relying on the fastener. So there are specialized hangers for these, and again, it's called a concealed hanger. And the issue with this is that now your joist length is a little bit shorter, right? Now you're taking into consideration the little thickness of that metal flange as well as the head of all those nails inside of there, right? So your joist is a little bit smaller. So again, when you're laying out a deck, not all your joists, your 2 outside joists are going to be slightly different. This is something I haven't seen in the field yet. I've seen it within the city of Kenora on housing projects. One of the I haven't seen this readily available. I've seen this done with blue skin actually, the first time I saw this. The issue is that when you lay a bunch of deck boards over it, you have a bunch of blue little tick marks with all the gaps, the 1/4 inch gap between. Some people like it, some people don't. With this, it's black and it kind of blends in. You typically don't really notice it. Grace Vicor isn't available in Canada yet, as far as I know. Like you have to go through an international supplier to have it shipped over, which is a nightmare and a headache and blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure it's not going to take very long for a peel and stick manufacturer to come out with something like this on this side of the border. Now the reasoning behind this is that a lot of the time what we'll see is, again, top of floor joists will be the first thing to rot just because of all the deck connectors put into it, right? So by adding this extra barrier on the top of all of your joists and then tying it into flashing on that you will go into next on the side of the house, is that you're technically sealing all those little penetrations from your deck screws or your hidden fasteners that go into there, right? As well as it also prevents, sometimes you have leaf buildup or dirt buildup, snow that just cram in there in that tiny little spot and it never really goes anywhere, right? Until you pressure wash it, but how many times does that ever happen, right? So it's another extra layer of defense and it makes your entrance or your structure last that much longer. Yeah, one of the also notes is that you can see where they've put it in relation to the joist hanger, right? All those nails that they've put through the joist hanger are now sealed, right? So, unfortunately, I actually probably could do an hour presentation on all the new methods of ledger connections, but I only have probably about, I don't know, 20 minutes left. So, there's a lot of variables having to do with this. Again, siding type, where you are in the building envelope, exterior insulation, brick, vinyl, concrete. Like I said, I could go on for a while. Whether you're making it accessible, is it right below the door? Is there a step below the door? So here's some of the most common, and then some of the ones I think we're going to see more and more of, or that I'm leaning towards in the very near future. This is typically the next step up from what I've seen in the past. What you have is a ledger over top of some flashing next to your interior framing rim board, right? So what you have is your door, the bottom of your door at your bottom plate, right? So it's within that 7 inches, so that step's quite nice, right? It's not a tripping hazard, there's a little bit there for snow buildup. A lot of what I see out there is that they're missing the flashing, right? What'll happen is that all those holes that you've put in for your bolts basically allow water into that rim board, right? You have no siding, and then you tie in your air barrier, right? Well, as soon as you put a series of bolts or nail through your air barrier, just your Tyvek or house wrap, right? It's not very watertight anymore, right? So again, what they mean by flashing is not your roof aluminum flashing, is they mean those peel and stick membranes that are out there, right? Sort of exactly similar to your ice and water shield, right? Except for ice and water shield for your roofing has a granulated surface to it. Well, this is basically smooth. There's no extra finish on it. So that's what they mean by flashing. It's a rubberized membrane. As soon as you put, basically what I showed you in the Grace Vicor, as soon as you put a bolt, or it self-seals, or it's supposed to. And again, the concealed hanger, your last rim joist to your ledger. So this is the next one I see the most of, and it doesn't have to be a concrete foundation. You can tie this into a preserved wood, right? The only difference is that your bolt location is dependent on your stud location, right? Crawl space, preserved wood. Concrete, it's easy. You almost put it almost anywhere, right? There's only a couple of spots that you couldn't. And again, what they've done simply here is that they've tied in with a silicone seal behind the ledger, right? But I'd like to see the next step up from this is, again, some sort of flashing over top of that ledger board. So a drip edge, yeah. So this, again, ledger bolt pattern is a general guide. One of the things that they found over the years, a lot of deck failures were actually happening with the ledger connection. So what was happening was you have these series of bolts in a 2x8 or a 2x10, and what they were doing was lining up all the bolts horizontally the entire length of the ledger board. So what you've done is, because the wood grain runs horizontally, right, you've basically kind of already created a split, like you've taken an axe from one end to the other and sort of separated all the wood fibers continuously along this ledger board. So what then all you're really relying on is all the nails from all your joist hangers, which isn't a lot. Like if you're only dealing with a 2x6 or an 8, that's like 4 nails per hanger, right? Or 8 nails per hanger. So the new rule is that the ledger bolt, again, you have to have minimum of 2 inches of material from the top, and then the next one down the line is 2 inches from the bottom, right? So you're going up and down as you're going down. The spacing of those bolts is dependent on the joist span. So it comes from a table, right? Which is dependent again on the size of the deck. 16 inches on center. Every other joist spacing may not be enough. One of the things with laying this out is that, yeah, you're I'm going to draw this for your ledger bolt pattern so that you're not going to be bolting behind a floor joist, right, where you have it tying in. One of the things to take into consideration. Another thing, now that I mention it, the company with the specialized fasteners, it's called Grex. Again, they're quite expensive. Again, they have these what's called, I think it's called like a ledger lock bolt. Again, it's like a weatherized brass connector. They say it's good for rated. It has more strength than, say, a 1/2-inch bolt. But again, it's a smaller diameter, and you can drive it with an impact driver versus a high torque gun, right? I hope everybody can see this and understand that it's kind of one of those things you may need to take home and study a bit. So this is what they call a ledger connection with a drainage space. I don't know if it really has a formal title yet, but what it allows for is a drainage layer behind your ledger board. So it allows for snow and ice and water and continuation of your, basically your weather barrier, depending on how far you're offsetting your ledger, right? Now there's a lot of variables to do with this. Now your bolt size, pattern, spacing completely changes, right? You're not bolting it directly to surface anymore. Now you're hinging it so that it can do this, right, with enough load. So sometimes, yeah, like it may take a whole lot of 3/8-inch bolts or a whole lot of 1/2-inch galvanized bolts, right? But the main thing here is that, again, the bolt pattern, you're still doing the up and the Z pattern. So there are advantages to this. Again, your siding details are a little easier to do. One of the things that's a little harder to do with this is how you actually physically get the ledger and then the washers or the spacer behind it to line up. See there on the left, it'd be kind of difficult to do. It'd be a little tricky with a bunch of series of washers. If there's a way where you could get those washers to not move, like glue or tape, like it doesn't matter. Something that's just going to keep it temporarily not moved while you're installing it, right? One of the products out there is, I can't remember the name of it, but basically what you do is you fill those 3 smaller holes with screws to the ledger, and then you drill the ledger bolt hole through the center one, right? And then you can line it up in your assembly. It's a little easier. One of the things that somebody joked for me is like, why would you not use hockey pucks? Like, it's basically a solid hunk of rubber that may or may not, I don't know the chemical properties of a hunk of, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and I was like, well, let's not experiment on this at this moment in time. So something like that to keep it off, to give you that drainage space. This is something I wanted to show you with houses getting more into exterior insulation. Okay, this is referred to as, the company name is what they call a Maine deck bracket. Maine as in the state of Maine, M-A-I-N-E. I personally have this on my own home. I went through exterior insulation. I have 3.5 inches of insulation. So the depth of this hanger is rated to a certain amount, right? And they come in certain depths depending on how much space you need, right? So if you have 3 inches, 4, 6, I don't know if they make a one for 8 inches of rigid insulation, this is a feasible way for retrofitting a deck or a ledger connection with exterior insulation, right? The insulation falls basically in that gap, right? Falls in that layer. And the only thing you have to be sure of is that those 4 bolts against the house, again, basically it's the way you would bolt your original ledger. It's 4 bolts rated to a certain strength. And then those 4 bolts determine how many brackets you need, the spacing of it, right? So when you see the finished product there on the right, it's kind of a nice clean system for horizontal siding, right? It allows you to seal around the penetration, incorporate your air barrier, as well as keep a drainage space, right? The key to it is that you have enough of them to support the ledger, right? That's the kind of the key. Again, they're only rated for so many pounds. So one of the things with manufactured, one of the recommendations on the installation instructions for doors now is sill pans. In this case, this image is of a manufactured. It's a piece of plastic that varies in width and length. There's also, again, peel and stick membranes where you're required to protect the door sill. Because if you talk to door and window manufacturers 5-10 years ago, they would tell you wholeheartedly that, yes, our doors and windows will never leak. You talk to them today, every one of them will say they will leak eventually. Let's put measures and procedures in place to prevent it. So, again, hence the invention of peel and stick membranes or manufactured sill pans. So at every entrance, we have a door or some sort of deck, right? So how do we tie the two in together? This is my favorite option. This allows for non-exact height. So if you see the kickboard there below your aluminum threshold, you don't want that to be more than 7 7/8, basically the max rise in a step. And then what you have is, again, your pan flashing over your floor sheathing, and then your exterior sheathing tying into your exterior flashing, right, over your deck. This theoretically stops, again, all the penetrations below that, and again, allows for that kickboard or that floor, or exterior wood sheathing, your 5/8 OSB typically, to last a lot longer, right? Now the one thing that this doesn't work with is, again, what I just showed you previously when you're getting into ledger boards getting further out. There's a completely different detail for that. This detail applies to typically what I see in the field a lot. Ledger board directly connected to the house. One of the other things I'll mention with CMHC wrap is when I do, on a work description, if I have like an entrance deck and a door, I'll put in the wording and in the clause and in the description, the work description, that the timing of the door installation must coincide with the installation of the exterior deck or the ledger board. So we can tie in the membrane flashing like this so that it's sealed to the weather for a long time, right? It's just a little forethought that makes for the building envelope that much tighter and that much more weatherproof. So from there, structure is done. You're on to decking options. There are a lot of products out there. Again, typically what we see, wood products, even just spruce pine fir, just off the shelf, non-treated, painted, stained, end treated, whatever. Then from there, people move on to pressure treated, right? You end treat all the cuts, lines up. Then you're getting into domestic wood species. Most readily available, even that I'm aware of, is the Western red cedar. Oily wood, rot resistant, found out west. There are other domestics. Southern yellow pine comes to mind. Again, more readily used in the States, but again, you might be able to find it. From there, composite and plastics. I know I put $3 signs versus $2 signs versus, but there are examples where some composites are less than cedar. Depending on where you are, you can sometimes get composites down to 99 cents a linear foot, which is a third the cost of cedar. And basically what a composite is again, they take resin and wood fiber and turn it into a board, typically a 2x6, 5/4, 3/4 inch, or sorry, 5/4, 4/4 material, rounded over. Sometimes it has grooves for deck fasteners, hidden deck fasteners, that type of scenario. And then from there, if you want long-lasting, comparable to composites and lifetime guarantee, you're talking about exotic tropical woods found in Caribbean, South America, tropical climates that are exposed to what mainly kills wood is salt air. You're talking woods, teak, ipe, ironwood. Ironwood's sometimes also known as tiger wood. Again, these are super, super dense materials. You're talking specialized fasteners, you're talking specialized saw blades that cut this stuff, or regular saw blades where you're going to need about 20 to 30 of them just to cut the stuff or rip the stuff. But again, lasts a lot longer. So, last little bit we'll get into is stairs, handrails, and guards. Last little bit's going to be kind of boring, just a bunch of rules, general guidelines that, again, Jan and I will be going over tomorrow in our instructions. We wanted this really available. You could, again, find, as well as I'll be editing this and throwing more photos in that, more examples. But basically when, sorry, forgot your name? Charlie was mentioning when, again, you have your minimum exit stair serving a single dwelling must have a width of not less than 2'9" 3/4". So if Charlie went out to the field there, looked at his stairs, and found that the gas meter was in the way, and the dimension between the gas meter and the handrail, guard, whatever was there, was less than 2'9", it's an issue, right? What's the way to solve it? Well, you're gonna have to work with the gas, the home, building department. Might be something simple, might be something very complicated. There's all kinds of options. So one of the big ones, rise for a set of stairs. Maximum is 7 7/8, and the minimum is 4 5/16. Sorry, some of these numbers are going to get a little accurate. Like I typically don't see framing down to the 16th, but the conversion from millimeters in the building code to inches is 15/16. It's just under 5 inches. So the run for residential, the maximum is 13 15/16, and the minimum is 8 1/4. And then one of the slight code issues that I see from time to time, especially in renovations where you're adding different floor finishes to existing stairs, is when you're going between adjacent treads. So you're walking up a set of treads, the difference in tread height can't be more than 3/16. Okay, so it's just under 1/4 inch, right? So when you're, again, most of the time, actually all the time that I've seen this been an issue is not with initial framing, but again, when you're getting into renovations where people are adding tile to floors that originally had vinyl. Well, now you're adding 3/4 inch. So that last step as you're stepping up is now 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch different than what it was before. And the reason you do that is because your body's into memory mode, right? If you're walking up a flight of stairs, your body just naturally walks up at the same pace, the same rhythm. And once you change that rhythm by according to 3/16 inch, you can either trip, or when you're going up, or when you're going down, it feels like you're dropping, right? And it's unnerving, especially, well, not necessarily for me or able-bodied people, but for some people walking up and down stairs, that 3/16 still feel it, like it's a little jarring. Yep. So one of the things that's kind of hard to explain is the stair throat, and this is a perfect picture of it. The minimum depth found under 982 is 3.5 inches for a 2x10. Now this image is measured wrong. The effective throat is actually from well, if there was a nick underneath where they cut the saw blade, so it'd be from there, right? That's now your effective distance, from there to the outside. That has to be at least 3.5 inches. It's hard to frame a stair with a 2x8 to get it legal. It can be done, but you have to reinforce it somehow. That's the only way I've seen it work. Not saying it's impossible. It can be done. It can be, yeah. You may have to sister it, right? So, 2 general guidelines for handrails. Again, follows under building code and under 987. At least one required handrail shall be continuous throughout the length of the stair, right? So it has to go from the top all the way to the bottom. So in this case, typically entrance, you have a straight run, but sometimes you do have landings. So your handrail is allowed to stop at terminations in direction, so where you have a landing or a change in direction, which you would find in the rest of that clause. And then the height of the handrail and stairs and ramps shall be not less than 34 and not more than 38. And in the code, that's a metric conversion. That's not an exact. There's like fractions of, but that's a general guide. Again, talking about handrails, something you grasp, something you're holding on to. And last little, I think it's 3 points I got here. So a guard. We're talking about something to prevent falling from one surface to another. You have a deck, a set of stairs, an entrance that's more than 23 and 5/8 between adjacent surfaces. So from the table to the floor, if it's more than 23 and 5/8, you need a way to prevent someone from falling from that surface. Okay? That's a guard. So if you have a deck or something that's under 23 and 5/8 in adjacent surfaces, like 6-8 inches, you don't need one. Sometimes it can be recommended, depending on the site conditions. There are instances where, again, you have a deck that's only 6 to 8 inches off the ground, but there's 2 feet away, there's a nice great big drop off into Lake Wabigoon or Eagle Lake, or like there's an inherent health and safety risk, right? So, the height shall be not less than 35 and 7/16. Again, the metric conversion, one of the things people often just say it's 36. High for when the surface between adjacent surfaces is less than 6 feet. So what that means is if you have a deck within 6 feet of grade, that's your guard height. When you have a deck that's, well, I'm 5'10", so if your deck's way up here, now your guard height shall be not less than 42 inches. So the reasoning, one of the things I like to discuss with my housing managers, builders, is that this rule is kind of intended, the 36-inch rule for guards is intended for children, right? And 42-inch is what you find throughout every other structure, commercial, everything. So if you actually come up, or if you actually measure your center of gravity, which would be your belly button, typically that 36 inches is below your center of gravity, right? So ideally, I try and recommend, again, I can't make them do it because I'm not out to make anybody do anything, but explain to them the science that if you have a deck or a scenario where, again, you might rough housing or that, it's in your best interest to have a guard or something where it's above your center of gravity, right? Something where you're going to run into it and you're not going to want to fall over the edge of it. I recommend 42 across the board, but in instances, I'm okay with 36. One of the other things is that it shall be designed that no member or opening loaded between 5.5 and 35, or basically 36 inches, above the floor or walking surface protected by the guard will facilitate climbing. So what that means is you don't want anything at or near floor level to allow kids to climb it and climb over top of it, right? Because you have a top rail, right? So there's one thing that you really can't change. So you don't want to have a guard design or detail where a child can step up, crawl up, grab the top rail, pull themselves over, and then hurt themselves, right? That's a big one. That's why you always see balusters, pickets, everything's vertical. And typically you only have one horizontal at the bottom. And the last one, the major one, is that the openings. So basically baluster, picket spacing, whatever you want to call them, can't be greater than 3 5/16, or again, that's that metric conversion. It can't be less than 4 inches. Basically, you can't have a child fit through the guard. So, what's wrong with that one? So we're obviously above 24 feet, so you need a guard, right? What's that? It's a horse fence. We could call it a horse fence. So it allows for climbing, and B, you could have even a large child crawl through that, right? So what you would need is, again, balusters, spacing, vertically, wouldn't allow climbing. In this case, even the simple fix might just be to remove the center horizontal member and install your balusters that way. It might work, right? And this one is blatantly obvious. I was shocked and surprised to see this. But they went to all the trouble doing everything else really well, and then gave up at the end, the finish line. So again, this you can fall through, nothing to prevent anybody from falling all that height. So, I am, yes, 429 on the money. So, Jan Eeks arrived in Thunder Bay, so we're still on for the Builders Challenge tomorrow because I wasn't going to run it. So yes, sign-up sheets at the back. One of the things that I really like everyone to do, please take the time to fill out a quick survey. These do go a long way to basically improve how I speak publicly, as well as get your input and feedback. I mean, it goes towards, again, helping me and helping the conference to go better. And sorry, last thing, there's a prize to be given away. Under somebody's seat, there's a piece of paper that says winner chicken dinner. Whoever has it. And if you're lucky enough, it may not even be under your own chair. You might be able to check under 2 or 3 chairs at the same time.